On December 25, 1989, in Pocatello, Kathy Jo Start was born. There were about 50,000 people living in Pocatello, an Idaho metropolis. She and her two siblings were cared for by mother Anna. Her younger brother Andrew was born roughly a year and a half after her, while her older sister Christy was born 6 years before her. Furthermore, I had a hard time finding any information on that online. Father Cassie was considered as educated and ambitious by her family and friends. She was incredibly good at making friends and had aspirations of attending college. At school, she had a lot of popularity. Both in her academic career and personal life, she excelled. She enjoyed listening to music and drawing. Being so close in age makes you do a lot of the same things in a tiny town like Pocatello, so she was also quite close to her brother Andrew in particular. As a result, they would frequently congregate in the same locations and with similar individuals. Allow me to transport you to September 22nd. Cassie attended high school in 2006. It was just another typical day for her at Pocatello High School, where she was enrolled in the 11th grade. It was a Friday. She couldn't wait to go out and hang out with her lover as the week was coming to an end. Following school, she was seeing someone who was a student at her school. His name was Matt Beckham and he was 16 too, and their relationship was wonderful, as if they were the most serious people ever. That afternoon, I picked up Cassie from school and drove her to her uncle's house, where she was given a tie by her mother, who was 16 years old. She was going to take care of their dogs and sit at their house for the weekend. Ty, on the other hand, was only a 15-minute drive from the school. Ty, Bannock County is home to him and Pocatello. I'll display a map on the screen to help you visualize how small the region we're discussing is. Around 5:30 p.m., Bart Kathy arrived at the residence, and Matt showed there at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the two of them were just chilling out, enjoying some quality time together while watching some movies. Two of their friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adam Chick, who were both 16 years old and attended the same school, also stopped over later that evening at around 8:20 p.m. to watch a movie together. They all watched Kill Bill Vol. 2. After that, I suppose Tori and Brian grew bored. At about 9:30, they just kind of abruptly left. They left the movie before it was even halfway over and decided to just go to the nearby theater to watch a movie. They left to watch another movie by themselves after breaking up with their companions in the middle of the film. I don't think I would be too upset if my friend said something like, "Hey, I'm sorry you guys are boring," like, "Oh, we're going to see a movie on our own." Well, perhaps I wouldn't if I were hanging out with my partner. Bullock, all right, so I get to have some alone time with my guy, Cassie, and Matt, her boyfriend. At about the same time, they just kind of hung out and kept watching movies together. Additionally, Cassie's mother Anna gave her a call to see how she was doing. Later that evening, at around 10 p.m., there was a power outage, and one of the dogs that Cassie had been watching over was like going to the stairs and looking down the stairs to the basement and was growling and occasionally barking. Cassie said she would call her in the morning to let her know if she needed anything. Naturally, it's a bit alarming if there's a power outage and one of the dogs is backing down to a dark cellar, just like in scary movies. Cassie was clearly a little spooked out, so Matt clearly wanted to stay with her and keep her company. When he called his mother to ask if he might remain, she politely declined, saying that he couldn't. That's thrilling. To be fair, Cassie was house-sitting for her aunt and uncle when her mother gave him the opportunity to bring her back to their home. Additionally, despite having promised to take care of the house, she didn't want to leave it unattended. Thus, she didn't. And, Max, clearly, Mom just didn't want to leave them both in a 16-year-old house by themselves. She thus arrived and brought up Matt at approximately 10:30 p.m. to return him home. Then Matt called one of the pals after he had departed. That was the previous tale. I'm not sure if I called him to attempt to hang out or if it was just a simple, "Hey, look, I have to go home" call. It's like, don't bother going back. However, Tara was practically whispering on the phone when he contacted them, and Matt at the time probably just figured that was because they were in a movie theater. Cassie is currently alone herself at her aunt and uncle's place. Her two buddies have already departed. It's just her and her boyfriend Matt now that he's gone. There's another power outage, so she's lounging on the couch by herself because she was going to fall asleep there. In addition to experiencing yet another power outage, items within the house, such as cabinets and doors, begin to bang. Also, Cassie was extremely frightened as a result of their recent viewing of scary films. Clearly, things within the house are falling apart. And there have already been 2 blackouts. What on earth is she going to do, then? This isn't a horror film, so she's not going to investigate in the basement. In real life, people tend to avoid the dangerous things. She simply seemed to be frigid. Who is that? For example, Matt might phone her around 12:30 a.m. that night to see how she's doing, just to make sure. He just wanted to make sure she was okay because he knew she was feeling a little scared when he left. She didn't respond, though, and considering it's 12:30 in the morning, I believe he was a little worried but not really concerned. She might have simply slept off. However, he contacted her 15 times the following day and she didn't pick up. Furthermore, he wished to visit the residence to ensure her well-being. However, that day he was unable to. I made several attempts to text and phone Cassie throughout the day, as did her mother. Cassie was not answering either. Again, she had some concerns, but they were unfounded, so she chose not to go check on the house or anything else. She most likely assumed it was just a case of teens being teenagers and not picking up when their mom calls. But her relatives, for whom she had been house-sitting, returned home the following day, on Sunday, September 24th. That is when her 13-year-old cousin found her lifeless body on the living room floor. They gave my mother a call right away. One of the first people on the scene was a lieutenant named Robert Rausch, who described the scene as horrific, with blood all over the place. After an autopsy and an almost instantaneous police inquiry, it was determined that Cassie had stopped wearing 12 potentially lethal items. And to be very honest, I was astonished when I first arrived at this case because it seemed like she had left behind such a typical day, like she had ended school on a Friday. It would have thrilled her to have a Friday night and a weekend off from classes. She was hanging out with her pals and her boyfriend at her aunt and uncle's house, where she would have felt comfortable. And then to have been stabbed 30 times, which is like being brutally killed, from something so safe and usual. Furthermore, she was a pretty girl by all accounts, which makes no sense at all. She was really popular. She has a truly generous heart. Which is why it was so shocking after all. Who would want to do this? Like, why would somebody do something like this? I can't even begin to image how her friends, family, and boyfriend felt like he was spending time with her and watching movies when they were around her. She was subsequently slain not even a few hours later. She was supposed to be house-sitting for her aunt and uncle. Her mom had just dropped her off at school. They could not have possibly anticipated a future in which this would occur. It was so unexpected that her pals had only seen her that day at school. Furthermore, I believe it's critical to discuss Cassie's narrative and provide some clarity on what transpired. Naturally, since the boyfriend is the first person the police will always look at, Matt, her boyfriend, was the first person the police looked into. Furthermore, he was the last person to have seen Cassie alive, or possibly the final person to do so. He was then brought in to be questioned and to take a polygraph test, which he passed. Naturally, at first they'll be wary of him, but they've already ruled him out rather quickly because he cooperated with the police and seemed to be unconnected to anything. There was not the slightest indication that he was even somewhat involved. He recounted to the police everything that had happened to him and Cassie since their previous interactions on Friday night, including their visit to her relative's home and their movie-watching activities with Tori and Brian. And it goes without saying that the police wanted to talk to them as well because they witnessed her the night she passed away. When they initially spoke with Tori at his parents' place, he revealed that they had gone out to see Cassie and Matt on the grounds that they thought there would be a party that evening. Once they arrived and saw it would not be a party but rather a place to watch movies on the couch, they became restless and made the decision to head out to the theater. After that, he spent the night at Brian's house. When police visited Brian at his parents' house to question him, his parents were there, and he told the same tale. What originally confused the police, though, was that neither Brian nor Tori could divulge to them the details of the film they were meant to see that evening in the theater. The more the police considered this account, the more strange I felt since. First of all, Matt said it was never going to be a party. Therefore, there's no reason why they ought to have assumed that. That is not logical. Furthermore, if Cassie and Matt were only going to disappear after an hour, what use was it to go out and stay out with them? They didn't even finish the movie, even though they had promised to watch Kill Bill Volume 2 with them. They say something like, "Actually, we're heading to the theater to see another movie. Why didn't they go do anything different if they were upset that there wasn't a party?" For example, why did they go back and carry out the same action they had already taken with Cassie and Matt? At the very least, see the film through to the very end and say, well, that was great, like let's get out right now. The narrative simply did not add up. For the cops, this was highly suspect. In order to find out if Brian and Tori had entered the cinema, they proceeded to the one that Tori and Brian had claimed to have visited. They also spoke with the staff member who was there that evening. Furthermore, this worker actually attended the same school as Tori and Brian. Therefore, if they had gone to the movie that evening, he would have noticed. He is aware of Tori's and Brian's appearance. And he was quite convinced that they hadn't attended the movie that evening. At the very least, based on what I understand, the police now have concrete evidence that Brian and Tori agreed with them. As a result, on September 26th, Brian was brought in for a second interrogation. And at that point, the police said, "Look, we talked to someone at the theater. We are aware that you guys are not from where I am. Yes, we lied, but we did so out of fear of getting caught because we were actually breaking into automobiles that evening," Brian admitted. In addition, Brian's parents gave the police permission to search the house, with a focus on Brian's bedroom. Additionally, they discovered a knife sheath beneath his bed, even though the knife wasn't there. It was his friend's knife and sheath, according to Brian, who says he had no idea where it was. His pal most likely possessed the knife, then. Brian was called in for a third interview the following day, September 27th, and they planned to administer a polygraph test to him during this interview. And that's when Brian kind of fell apart. His parents were out with him. Therefore, I'm not sure if his parents' constant presence on his conscience or the impending polygraph were the reasons behind his breakdown. In the end, he revealed to the authorities Cassie's true fate that evening, and about the involvement that both he and Tori had. He said to the investigators that he and Tori had gone over there to watch a movie, and that when they departed, they had really left a door open to allow them to return later that evening, and they returned wearing masks and dark clothing, intending to hide in the basement. Brian said that their original idea was to simply turn out the lights in an attempt to frighten Cassie. However, Tori devised the scheme to kill Cassie that evening. Thus, by 10 p.m., they were in the basement of the house. They had entered covertly. The first power outage occurred while Matt and Cassie were still at the house. Moreover, there was no power outage. Brian and Tori had turned off the house's electricity. The fuse box was in the basement, which is where they were clearly located. They were so going on and off in this manner. Their hope was that Matt and Cassie would visit the basement to see how the fuse box was doing. However, that did not occur. Even though Matt and Cassie didn't go to the basement and Matt eventually left, it appears like they would have killed each other if they had gone down to check the fuse box. There was then another power outage following Matt's departure, and once more they were cutting the fuse box. It was unsuccessful. Cassie refrained from visiting the basement. They then began smashing objects. In an effort to get Cassie to investigate what was going on, Brian really broke her ashtrays on the steps leading to the basement. However, it failed once more. At that point, they became agitated and simply emerged from the cellar, stabbing Cassie 30 times in the living room. At first, Brian said he was unaware that they were going to confront her. "You know, I thought we were just there to terrify her," he tried to say. Subsequently, Tori simply approached her and stabbed her. "And I was kind of startled." Quietly, he told the cops. It was not anticipated to occur. It was meant to be a jest. In addition, he stated that Tori, not him, had stabbed Cassie 3 times and that Tori had threatened to kill him if he notified the authorities about it following his confession. In the end, Brian guided authorities to Black Rock Canyon, the location where he and Tori had attempted to conceal all of the evidence. Thus, the knives would indicate that the clothing they had on that evening was present. Additionally, there was a videotape that he and Tori had obviously attempted to set on fire, and as I previously indicated, they had recorded all of the preparation leading up to this murder or similar murders on the videotape. They were planning several matters, even if there weren't multiple matters. On the videotape, there is a footage of them writing a list of persons they wished to kill in the school library. It was dubbed a death list. Cassie was included in this list, and since filming began on March 24th, it felt like they had been planning this for a very long time. They continued to film until the evening of the September killings. "I apologize to Cassie's family, but she needs to be the one," Brian says to the camera at one point in the video. "We must follow the plan." Furthermore, even though Brian did have a crush on her, I have no idea why she was included on this list. Perhaps his anger sprang from the fact that his crush would never materialize. But to be honest, there was no logic or purpose behind it. They simply really put a number of people they knew on the list. It seemed stupid to them, and all they wanted to do was kill it. Their sole desire was fame, and they drew inspiration from serial killers and horror films. The thought that there are 16-year-old children who want to kill for the thrill of it chills my spine because they seem capable of such heinous and vicious acts as stopping someone 30 times. For a long time, you are in close proximity to the person who is stabbing them. It is therefore quite horrifying to be 16 years old and capable of something like that simply because you've seen someone do it in a movie or because you've seen other serial killers do it. Cassie, too, was 16. Her entire life lay ahead of her. She appeared to be such a sweet young lady. She simply didn't deserve this, too. Brian Schreiber led police to all of the evidence, and after that he was taken into custody and his bond was set at $1 million, keeping him in the Bannock County Jail. By now they hadn't even scheduled a follow-up interview with Torrey. Upon his evident examination by the SA police, it becomes clear that he is unaware of Brian's confession, the police's extensive knowledge base, and the weight of the evidence against him. Thus, he describes to the police how he and Brian departed from Cassie and Matt at 10 o'clock at night, and they proceeded to pilfer automobiles. Evidently, Brian and Torrey had a conversation at some point prior to Brian's confession, during which they concocted the tale that they had been breaking into cars. Then, at 11:30 p.m., he reports to the police that he and Brian returned to Cassie and Matt, and that they spent the remainder of the night there. Then, at a nearby convenience store, a witness saw him and said, "Oh yeah, I was just battered by matches for Brian's cigarettes," according to one of the detectives. Eventually, he also confesses to being close to a Black Rock Canyon, which is, naturally, where Brian demonstrated to authorities where all of the evidence had been hidden. Subsequently, he was informed by the police that they possessed all the evidence against him. At that point, Torrey requested legal representation and accused Brian of being the mastermind behind everything. It was him who truly desired to stab and murder Cassie, and there was just this enormous back-and-forth blame game going on. Neither of them was willing to accept full responsibility for the murder itself. Fortunately for the police, however, they possessed all the evidence they required to establish the truth about what transpired that evening, as well as evidence that would be invaluable in the event of a prosecution. There should be no "I oppose killing" statement. Even though I know it's wrong, I'll help you prevent someone from using it. They will get more desirous of it. That's right, I'm going to miss you. So we're going to murder her and her companions and then carry on with our lives. I have some updates regarding Kirsten. Since she will be home between 6 and 7, it might kill her to drive over to Cassie's place, scare the very daylights out of them, and kill them one by one. Yes, hell yes. Apologies. Torrey. After that, Adam Chick was taken into custody, accused of first-degree murder, and had a $1 million bond imposed. After that, Brian was called in for a fourth interrogation, during which he reiterated his accusation that Torrey was the ringleader. The only person who stopped her was Torrey. Police eventually questioned him, though, saying, "Did Torrey force you to stop Cassie?" He nodded in response, then went on to say that Torrey had been telling him to stop her since he had stabbed Cassie 4 times in the leg and chest. "She must be stopped by you." It's also said that Torrey told him it wouldn't work. "She must pass away." Thus, 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree murder conspiracy were brought against Brian and Torrey. Additionally, a jury tried each of them independently, and once more they were attempting to assign blame to one another. The medical examiner who conducted Cassie's autopsy attested to the amount of stab wounds she sustained, as well as the fact that we used 2 different knives, one serrated and the other not, and the majority of the stabbing wounds were caused by the serrated knife. In addition, the boys' recordings were used by the prosecution during the trial as proof that they should go down in history as a scream, although with real-life equivalents like Ted Bundy or the Zodiac Killer. Those folks pale in comparison to what we will achieve. He must have given it 15 tries. They have never traveled by car. Thus I have. He is thus a patient here at all times. You never get compensated in your situation because they believe someone. Thus everything was resolved. Thus Brian also stated on the videotape that tonight is when our plan is scheduled to happen. We can continue if we can finish, kill, and start our fast. It is intended to occur completely. However, if you look around with ease, we can get our first kill, which began in January. And what's so disgusting about this specific line he says is that it sounds to him like we're just ripping off a Band-Aid, getting this quick murder done so we can keep killing people like Ted. Cassie was the first person on their list to be murdered when they found a chance to break into our home alone, and they were literally just pulling off a Band-Aid. Furthermore, what transpired with her is absolutely heartbreaking. And it's just as well that they were unable to cross everyone on that lengthy list of those they intended to kill. The two guys intended to make their own small horror film, a scaled-down version of Scream, but they were also greatly influenced by horror films in general. Furthermore, they had actually tried to kill 8 or 9 different people before Cassie was killed, but it didn't work out or happen. Therefore, even though Cassie was on the kill list, the murder on the night of her model was premeditated, as the perpetrators were aware that she was simply by herself that evening. They were aware that not only were they intending to kill Matt that evening, but she would also be house-sitting. But in the end, he moved on, and between Tori and Brian, there was definitely a power dynamic there. Just like in their friendship, Tori's dominance was obvious. Having said that, though, I don't believe this was a ringleader issue because both of them carefully planned these things out, as exemplified by the tapes. They can literally be seen on videos arranging these highly complicated affairs. "I've always wanted to leave my mark on the world," Brian says on one of the records. In addition, it was evident from the videos that they had a significant hand in the 8 or 9 previous attempts at killing people before Cassie was killed, and the only reason this didn't work out is that those victims weren't at home by themselves when it happened. Furthermore, the existence of these cassettes, which seem to be a record of the thoughts that motivate and push these people to desire to commit murder, is just absurd. As if they had detailed every step of their reasoning for wanting to do this action. In my opinion, it's important to examine their power dynamics, as it's abundantly evident from the video that was shot prior to the killings that Tori is the more powerful of the two in their friendship. He constantly puts Brian down. Additionally, he advises him not to incorporate his humor on the records at one point in the recordings. And just after that, he cracks a joke of his own. Another thing on the tapes that demonstrates his authority over Brian and his slight disdain for him is when he becomes upset with Brian for discussing spiritual ideas. For example, Brian objects to the term evil because he rejects the existence of evil. He believes that to be something that is either invented by religion or a religious concept. Furthermore, he favors words like good and negative. As a result, it comes off as strongly saying, "I'm right, you're wrong, you're stupid because you're wrong, and I don't want to hear your opinion on any of these tapes." Thus, it's an expression, you know. That was yet another test, God. You thought evil was a more benevolent kind of God. It is, indeed. However, you are aware of it. Satan's disciple is evil of origin. Our shows express us in both positive and negative ways according to a series. Additionally, you can hear how heartless and cut off from humanity and the outside world they actually are in these tapes. Serial killers were their heroes. They mentioned Ted Bundy, the Zodiac Killer, and the Hillside Strangler directly, as if they truly respected and looked up to these individuals. Furthermore, the fact that Tori was actually hanging out with Matt the day after they killed Cassie merely serves to highlight how cut off from humanity they are. As I previously indicated, Matt had been phoning Cassie non-stop. He either tried to reach her 15 times or called her 15 times, or in fact, he even asked Tori if they might go check on her. I mean, I'm a little worried that she's not picking up her phone. Tori responded, "No, we can't because my car has nerve gas in it." He is aware that he killed Cassie in the interim. His girlfriend, Match, had been killed. Knowing why Cassie isn't returning Matt's calls, he just says, "Yeah, sorry, I don't have enough fuel to go that." Naturally, I'll be including a few snippets from the videotapes that were shot prior to Cassie's situation. However, there's one from the evening before Cassie was killed that I can clearly recall, and they seem to be planning what they're going to do. At another point in the tape, one of them says, "We're 6 psychopaths who get pleasure in killing other people," and Brian quotes them, saying, "We're going for a high death count." We want to scream exactly like that. Additionally, they captured themselves driving past Cassie's parents' home the day before Cassie was murdered. It appears that all they were doing was a quick drive-by to check on her parents' whereabouts and see if they could pull off the crime that evening without her victim and Sam's. Would she be our friend? However, what's the deal? Everyone has to give up something. Cassie's daughter is already our first victim. she will be by herself in a large, deserted house in the middle of nowhere. How flawless are you capable of being? Really, holy HT, even thinking about it makes me horny. Yes, it's odd because the voice has a clear hatred for Cassie in it. I don't know what made them detest her so much. I'm not sure if their hatred of Cassie is a result of this, or if their desire to kill her makes them hate her even more in order to lessen their guilt. However, in the same video, they talk about Cassie with such hate in their voices that they also refer to her as their friend. I believe that because he had a crush on her and it was never going to work out the next day, Brian may have harbored some animosity toward her. On the actual murderous day, they record one final scene in Tori's car right before they smuggle themselves back into Cassie's relative's home to carry out the murder. We arrived in his vehicle at 9:50 on September 22, 20. Thankfully, we have a growing group of people who want to kill our two friends, and they are directly across the street in that house. The fact that they refer to it as a grueling task is also pitiful, as it's not something you have to do. This is what they wish to accomplish. They continue to act as though it's a half-hearted summer because they had to kill their friends after that. Then Brian says, "Be quiet. We looked over the entire residence. We are aware that there are numerous doors and hiding spots. At all, I opened the rear doors. Unlocked. All we have to do now is enter and wait. Yes, we are anxious at the moment, but we are prepared." The video evidence that follows was taken shortly after Cassie and him got married. Simply murdered Cassie. We just got out of her house. No, this isn't a joke. I gave her a throat stab. Her lifeless body had just vanished from view. I killed Cassie, dude. Well, I only know that. All right, so far so good. We need to straighten up our act. It's all right. All right, how are things going? Nobody leaves. Okay, we're back now. I'm going to miss you. I don't think they actually did ever end up going and buying movie tickets, because again, no one at the theater saw them there that night. But what they did do later that night is go to Black Rock Canyon and dispose of the evidence. I'm also just going to quickly give you a little bit of background information on Brian and Tori, just, I guess, to paint a little bit of a picture of how they got to this place. Brian Draper was born on the 21st of March in 1992. Parents Pam and Carrie Draper. Brian spent most of his childhood in Utah before moving to Pocatello with his family, and people he knew described him as friendly and happy. But I feel like this must have been a real surface-level evaluation of his character, because on the flip side of this, he was obsessed with the Columbine shooting. So there's definitely some stuff that he wasn't upfront about. I mean, I don't think you're going around telling people like, I'm obsessed with the Columbine shooting, but that was definitely a darker side to him that people obviously didn't know that. Describing him as just like, nice, happy dude like that just isn't the case. Tori Adamczyk was born on the 14th of June in 1992. Parents Shannon and Sean Adamczyk, he was born in Pocatello, but honestly, I couldn't find a whole lot of information on him and his upbringing and what he was like. As we know, they did both attend Pocatello High School, where Cassie and Matt also went to school, and this is how they all met and became friends. And Tori and Brian in particular became friends when they bonded over their shared love and horror movies. And they would always watch horror movies together. Brian always felt like he never fit in with the other kids at school, partly due to his stutter, but he just never really felt like he was part of the crowd. He was bullied by his classmates, and I think in hindsight this may have been a traumatic experience that contributed to his antisocial behavior. And I couldn't find a whole lot of information about Tori, but the two of them just kind of fit into the same mold, and that's why they got along so well. And they were both into the same sort of things. Like I said, the horror movies. And I also mentioned that Brian was into the Columbine shooting and Tori was impressed by the shooters. So you know these were just upstanding citizens, clearly. And an interviewer Brian did like 15 years after the murder. He said, "I felt like a nobody, and I felt like I'd be somebody if I did something big." And Bob, in the end, both Tori and Brian were convicted of first-degree murder, and in 2007, they were sentenced to life without parole. And they also received 30 years to life for conspiracy to commit murder. Both of them have made multiple appeals against their convictions to try and have their sentences reduced. Tori's first appeal was in late 2010, and he basically tried to argue that they didn't provide sufficient evidence to convict him of first-degree murder because they couldn't prove which of the 12 potentially fatal stab wounds was the actual fatal stop that killed Cassie. And they also couldn't link him to either of the knives, which meant that they couldn't prove that he inflicted the fatal stab that killed Cassie. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the autopsy said that there were 12 potentially fatal stab wounds. I didn't know which of the stabs actually killed Cassie, and they also said that there were 2 knives that were used, one that was serrated, one that was serrated, one that was non-serrated. And the one that was serrated was the one that was responsible for the majority of the stop wounds. That was one particularly bad wound that struck Cassie's right ventricle, and that was actually caused by the non-to-right blade. So the person who had helped Brian and Tori purchase the knives, who at the time had no idea that they were planning to murder Cassie. Like, they had no idea that these knives were going to be used in this way. But this person testified that Brian claimed the serrated knife, that meant Tori had the non-serrated knife. And as we know, the serrated knife was responsible for the majority of the stab wounds. The non-serrated knife is the one that hit in Cassie's right ventricle to her heart, which was likely one of the fatal stab wounds. So the prosecution tried to argue that while Brian was responsible for most of the stop wearing, Tori was the one who was responsible for the one that was fatal. And that's what they argued against Tori's appeal. I mean, I think either way, it doesn't really matter, like it's such a non-argument, because that was 30 stab wounds, 12 of which were potentially fatal. And it's clear that both of these knives were used in this attack, so it doesn't matter which of these 12 wounds was the fatal one. It doesn't matter who was the one who made that one fatal stabbing, and that both responsible for trying to get that fatal stop when they were both trying to kill her. You're not stabbing someone 3 times and hoping that they live also in this appeal. It's so stupid. Tori Trust argued that he wasn't given a fair trial because they charged him as if he was a principal in the matter instead of as an accomplice, when in reality he may have been an accomplice. But obviously this was easy to refute because of the video evidence, because of the stab wounds. It was very clear that he was not just an accomplice, and so his appeal was rejected. Brian also made an appeal in early 2011, and he tried to argue that the court made an error in not suppressing his 4th interview with the police, which is the interview where he explicitly admitted to stabbing Cassie. So his appeal was basically just him trying to get off on a technicality. Thankfully, though, this appeal was denied. Tara also tried to make multiple more appeal attempts. He made another one in 2015, and when that was denied, he actually tried to take it to the Idaho Supreme Court. And then they also rejected his appeal in 2018. He also then tried to appeal for something which is called a federal writ of habeas corpus, which is basically just an appeal that would grant him a new appeal if they found that his first appeal had been a mistake. And then this was also denied in 2022. He also lodged another appeal basically stating that his sentencing was unlawful since he was not one of the rare teenagers whose crime establishes or conveys irreparable corruption. But this, again, was denied. As it stands, both Tori and Brian remain in the out-of-her-state correctional institution, where they are still facing life behind bars. Cassie's family also filed a lawsuit against the Idaho School District, basically alleging that they should have known that Tori and Brian would have been risk to that daughter. But the Supreme Court dismissed this case on the basis that the conduct were fishable. And I do agree with this ruling. While my heart genuinely goes out to Cassie's family, because it is honestly simply the most senseless act, I cannot comprehend what they went through. But I don't imagine that the school could have seen this coming. Honestly, incidents like this really remind you that there are deranged people out there who that's simply not coming back to them. Really. Like, that's simply to redeem individuals like that. An old guard, they were 16 years old at the time. I genuinely do believe that they deserve to be in jail for the rest of their life. Simply said, I don't believe that kind of person is capable of rehabilitation. Tori, after all, is still attempting to claim that his sentence was illegal. It's obvious he doesn't feel regret. When he kills a 16-year-old girl and ends her life prematurely, even though she had a lot left to live, he feels as though he has done something wrong. He also took her away from her friends, her loved ones, and her family. He even doesn't feel guilty about it. He clearly doesn't feel regret for what he did, based on the manner in which he makes his appeals and the statements he makes in them. I am aware that sentences ranging from life in prison for minors to 16-year-olds can be quite contentious.